both inherited shortly after the Civil War in 1918, 1919. And from there, moving into the Winter War and Continuation War, they still commonly use this firearm. They would also try to enhance it, or successfully enhance it in many ways, where they would shorten them, lighten them, make them heavier, make them more accurate, better trigger, better barrel, and make better ammo for them, but still be compatible with the Russian ammo, so that if they captured it, they could use it and, you know, stay well supplied. There would be several other firearms that Finland would make domestically, would capture, or would purchase from other countries, and I will grab one of them that they made domestically that made them very successful towards the latter half of the Winter War and throughout most of the Continuation War. This is the Suomi submachine gun, which proved to be very effective, where the Russians had something similar, but was not very, not very reliable. And the Finns had something really fantastic here that the Russians would ultimately redesign their submachine gun. But this was something that really helped the Finns fight off the Russians very effectively, and with how they were able to remanufacture these Russian rifles, be very effective and make each individual man matter instead of giant hordes of people attacking. I think.
We'll talk about I'll take the second half of the continuation.
Okay. So those are finished firearms that we have, but also after the fact we'll be happy to go into detail.
You know, there's a number more that if you're curious about, we have here, and we'll return them to our display if you have questions. It's very interesting history to those who care about small minutia, such as us. So, following the Finnish advance to the borders prior to the Winter War, the Finnish military would kind of take a static position, although they were receiving a lot of pressure from the Germans in order to help them with the siege in Leningrad or push offenses into Murmansk and further east in order to try to put more pressure on the Russians to get them redistribute the divisions. The Finnish military was also, or the Finnish government was also receiving international pressure, particularly from the United States and from Great Britain, to not push their advance any further. Finland, seeing as that they had pushed to their previous borders, weren't really seeking to conquer territory, really, only to hold more favorable defensive positions, and weren't seeking to win some kind of groundbreaking world conquest. They were more or less attempting to just take back what was theirs. So Finland would more or less spend from about early 1942 until mid-1944, essentially holding their position, much to German consternation. It was right about at that time, you know, 1944, things are not doing terribly well for the Germans. They're starting to get utterly destroyed, taking massive losses. The D-Day landings are just around the corner. The German military is split thin, and the Russian military is just utterly pushing through them and annihilating them. Well, the Russians come to the conclusion, all right, well, we've clearly reformed our military. We're able to smash the mighty German war machine. It's time to take care of Finland. We're going to take care of Finland. Our mighty army that the Germans, supposedly the greatest military in the world, cannot stop. We will destroy Finland. We will push straight into Helsinki and annihilate it. Finland will capitulate and we will occupy all of Finland. Well, it seems that one thing that the Russians had forgotten in their lessons from the Winter War was that Finland was actually filled with Finns. This made them much more resistant to just rolling over, like they, almost as if they, you know, ignored everything that just happened a few years ago. The Russians would launch it. This year is the 80th year anniversary of this massive Russian offense. In Finnish, it's usually referred to as the battles of Tali in Hantala, and it's the largest armored conflict that would take place in Scandinavia. Again, massively outnumbered by the Russians, and with little equipment, the Finns would tenaciously defend every little bit of ground that they had managed to take. In situations where they were really utterly outmatched, they would make small pullbacks, leave little booby traps behind, and every time the Russians would try to just take a single step forward, just inch forward, they would be met with massive resistance. And in the same manner that during the Winter War, that the Russian military was just utterly stopped dead in its tracks, a modern industrial army with mighty equipment were just yet again utterly stopped dead in their tracks by the tenacious Finns. Although that Finland would again lose most of the territory that they had reconquered from the Winter War. They would be pushed back pretty much to their second to last line of defense, the VKT line, where some of the most intense armored battles took place. It's again, to give you an idea of disparity, the Russians again are attacking with thousands of armored vehicles, where Finland may have a couple dozen. Finland had all of 2 heavy tanks, about 14 medium tanks, and maybe about 60 light tanks from their own, which were realistically captured from the Russians during the Winter War. And the vast sum of this equipment was completely and utterly obsolete, no match whatsoever for these mighty, massive Russian armored vehicles. And despite being outclassed in every single way, the Finns seemed to just make it work. If any of you care to, there's a half-decent movie that's just called Tali Inhantala, where you can see some of it in detail. Several of us were just in Finland not too long ago. We were graced to be able to visit the Panzermuseo in Hämeenlinna at Parola, and we got to see the 2 Finnish heavy tanks that they had for the war survived the war. Neither one of them were destroyed, despite seeing heavy combat. It was kind of a surreal experience to lay our hands on this machine, and you could see right on the front of it a massive gouge in the steel from a Russian shell that had plowed through the front of it, bounced off, hit it somewhere else, bounced off of that, hit it again in the turret. And the shock of this vehicle from the shell hitting it, which didn't penetrate the armor, the crew survived. They were able to back their vehicle up. They'd come around a little corner to fight 1 tank versus 7 Russian tanks that had turned the corner. All 7 of them opened fire on this single Finnish heavy tank. Somehow managed, survives, backs up. And the crew all pours out blood pouring from their ears, their nose, their eyes, every orifice in your body that could bleed, eardrums busted, every capillary on your skin bleeding from everything. Bail out of their tank, somehow survive. The tank commander at the moment, who was in charge of the Panzer Division, as an aside, the Jägers are attached to the Panzer Division, so it's kind of our people, which is why we're so interested in the stories we're telling. Tells a single older T-34 tank, obsolete, to do the exact same thing and push right around that same corner. Well, the Russians, they see their own tank come down the road, shrug off all this fire and think, what on God's green earth is going on here? We're out of here. They all start to turn tail and run. The single Finnish tank comes around the corner, sees all the Russians, starts scurrying away and opens fire. He manages to destroy 4 of the Russian tanks. One of them, it just so happens the tank is sideways. It's not this model of tank, but it serves the purpose. It's shot right through the side. Shell passes right through it, doesn't explode on the inside. The Russian crew is horrified, jumps out of it, runs off into the forest, and in a matter of minutes, after the Finns have pushed the Russians away, say, oh, there's just a couple of holes in it. It's perfectly good. Get it going. Get it going, and it would continue to serve in the Panzeraufmarsch. Now, this is just one little story of a massive conflict, really the largest battle that took place in Scandinavia and the largest expenditure of manpower that Finland would have in the continuation war. It was like the Winter War. It was brutal losses on both sides. But nevertheless, Finland would again grind the Russians, and now a mighty, again, industrial, modern nation, to rival any first nation of the world, ground to an utter halt, dead in their tracks by the little tiny nation of Finland. Stubborn and strong, they held, and having utterly flipped the Russians over, now seemed like an awfully good time to negotiate for a peace deal. We're still holding in here, so let's get in. I think we're going to talk about